Welcome, everyone. I'm Patricia Kranz, the Executive Director of the Overseas Press Club. And we are so happy that our program committee organized this program on Georgia, which is part of our series that we call In the Thick of It, where we try to get journalists who are right at the heart of some crisis happening around the world. And there's several happening right now, as we all know, but we're very happy to have this one on Georgia, which from my point of view is often overlooked as someone who covered that part of the world for a long time. So at any rate, I'm going to introduce Singeli Agnew, who is a governor of the Overseas Press Club and a filmmaker a documentary filmmaker who basically does it all. She's a cinematographer, a producer, a writer, a director, and she's worked on productions for HBO, Al Jazeera, Netflix, National Geographic, and others.
Thank you, Patty.
So they will start the program. Please put your questions in the chat, and I'm sure we will get to them. So take it away, Singeli. Thank you.
Thank you, Patty. So we're really fortunate today to be joined by three incredibly talented journalists who are going to help us make sense of what's going on in Georgia right now. First, Sophiko Megrilidze has worked for the Associated Press for more than 30 years, is now a senior producer in the Tbilisi bureau. She covered the war in Chechnya, the migrant crisis in Europe, many other stories from the region, and of course has been deeply involved in covering the recent protests. To say that Sophiko is a wealth of information for anyone looking to understand Georgia is a total understatement. Will Cathcart is an American freelance journalist who's been in Tbilisi for more than 16 years. He's reported on conflicts across the region. You can find his work in foreign policy, CNN, The Daily Beast, just to name a few. And actually, 30 minutes ago, his most recent opinion column went live on The Hill. And I encourage everyone to read it, for it's a really concise description of the stakes of what's unfolding in Georgia right now. Finally, Daro Sulakauri is a celebrated Georgian photojournalist who first became well known for her work documenting Chechen refugees. Daro studied at the International Center for Photography in New York and then returned to Georgia. And I quote here from her TED Fellowship the announcement from the TED Fellowship, returned to Georgia to use her camera to create a living archive of her home country, defending against the erasure of its borders, cultures, and history. I encourage everyone to listen to her TED Talk, as well as check out her recent project, Shifting Borders, focused on Russian-occupied regions of Georgia, supported by the Catchlight Foundation. And she's been filing for both Reuters and the New York Times over the past couple of weeks. Each of you has been out in the streets night after night, filing on deadline in really difficult circumstances. And so we're just really grateful to have you take the time to join us. And as Patty said, I know with so much happening in the world, it's been perhaps sometimes frustrating to not have more attention on this. So we're glad to be able to do this with you. It's just after 9 p.m. on Friday in Georgia right now. I don't think we can overstate the timing and importance of this moment. Sophiko, if I can start with you, can you just help us understand how and why the protests started?
Yeah, hello. Thank you very much for organizing this event. So yeah, these protests are taking place already nonstop for 16 days, and it is not diminishing in size. On the contrary, it is expanding, getting bigger, and every night, like thousands of people are outside in front of the parliament, protesting and demanding Georgia to be back to its European path. And it is very important for the citizens of Georgia. And every night when we're covering, we have the same question repeating, like, why you're here now? And why? And the answer is similar, because everyone who is out in the streets, they say, it is our existential choice to be part of Europe. And it is so important that we defend our future within the European Union. So for them, standing outside in a cold, spending all nights like in the street, it is very natural for the people we talk. They say, we are here because we are defending our future of our children. And because for Georgia, Europe was always an existential choice. It is also written in the constitution that the Georgia will be part of the EU and will have the EU and NATO integration. And suddenly, like, it was really unexpected. On 28th of November, the Prime Minister made a statement saying that the Georgian Dream, the ruling party, is halting EU talks with accession talks with the EU. And it was really, I mean, unexpected. And right away, people can get out of the street. It wasn't organized like a protest. People went out into the streets and stayed there for more than weeks. So it is, as I may repeat there, for Georgia, it is the existential choice, either be part of the Russia or be part of the Europe. And now people in the street think that this, I mean, this, it is today to make this choice, to stay here into the, to protest, to defend the pro-European future.
Just rewinding a slight bit, the elections in October, the allegations of sort of falsification, corruption, can perhaps, Will, you could take this. Describe what happened in the elections and how that sort of relates to what's happening now.
Hi. So the best explanation I've heard for it is it was kind of a multi-pronged effort, and it was very sophisticated. Essentially, based on polling, Georgian Dream knew it was likely to lose, and based on 5 months of protest where hundreds of thousands of people were out on the street for months straight, they knew that they would most likely lose. It's not new in Georgia to rig elections. The way they did it, though, was they focused on minority villages where people weren't necessarily connected, where people weren't politically active. And there's a great story from OC Media where an election observer is just sitting out in front of the polling station, and there are guys just walking up saying, all right, I've got 20. And then they check their numbers, and so they're just bringing votes there. And then they're just handing out the money out in the open. In Tbilisi, you didn't see that kind of thing, which is why the results were a bit different. So that was one thing. It's good old-fashioned bribery. Then there was a mass effort of intimidation. There were insane images of just people being beaten up in front of polling stations. So when you start circulating those images, it's intimidation. And then you had the Central Election Committee. They got all their data. They're supposed to look at this stuff and evaluate. And it turned out that 30%, I think, correct me if I'm wrong, 30% of the female vote was missing, or there was 30% more men suddenly in Georgia than there should have been, which is enough to throw any normal election out. The CEC covered that information up. And, so at that point, a ton of lawyers and NGOs, activists were filing lawsuits. The president filed lawsuits, everything. Most of those have been thrown out. So, but the problem was the day after, especially with this younger generation who were out in the streets for 5 months straight, they knew it was probably rigged, but they lost. And I think it's probably the first time a lot of them have been disappointed by a government. I'm 42 years old and I'm American, so I've been disappointed by a government quite a lot. But I think a lot of these younger Georgians, expected that after these protests that, democracy would work, and it didn't. And so there was almost a sense of mourning after that. And people jumped in on Twitter and started criticizing Georgia, that it wasn't sticking up for whatever, or that these people, or that the election generally was lost. It wasn't. And so it took about 3 weeks really for the European Union and everybody to get the information. There's a guy named Hans Gutbrod who synthesized it really well and just sort of put out these reports so that even editors would accept them. If I was going to write, well, this election was rigged, I would need to source that, right? Well, so finally that information was provided. And so few people, let's say, are contesting that, except for those who happen to be in power in Georgia.
Daro, I mean, as someone working with a camera, you have to really be literally in the thick of all of this. Can you just describe what you've experienced over the last couple of weeks and what you're seeing, what's going on? Bring us into it.
First, if you don't mind, I can just to say briefly about Georgia, that we're a very tiny nation of under 4 million people. It's on the crossroads of Europe, Asia, and the Middle East. And I feel like much of the outside world knows very little of our country. And much of the time, our existence is threatened by the aggression from our neighbor, Russia. 20% of our country approximately is occupied by Russia. We have 2 breakaway regions, and one of them is South Ossetia. And even today, like, Russian forces are continuing to push their administrative boundary to expand control and flaunt their power. So moving forward, it was very important for us to get the EU candidacy. It was a huge deal. And this protest that erupted now is no surprise, because it was so crucial to get the candidacy at first, and now this happened. And to answer your question about media, I feel like recent protests in Georgia has brought a significant attention because of the police brutality against media and protesters. And the violence was escalating like really fast, and it was the attacks on the media was to bring the example. One of the first journalists, like Guram Rogava, who was covering the protests, was struck in the head by this Riot policeman, causing severe injuries for him, including facial fractures. And he was pretty much saved because the doctor told him that if it was like millimeters fall in a different place, he would lose the feeling in his legs and hands. So I think.
And who is he hurt by? Who was it? The police, or was it?
It was the Riot policeman. There's videos of it, which one can see on the internet. And I think there are 400 individuals that have been detained so far, and almost all of them have physical violence during the arrest, and injuries such as broken noses and concussion. Like from my personal experience, I had this moment. It was one of the first days that the clash happened between the police and the protesters. And I always, from my previous experiences, when I stay close to the police, I'm more safe in a way that I don't get attacked. And this is what I did. I stayed behind a little bit when that clash happened. And at some point, it was only me and a cameraman who I didn't know who he was, but we were surrounded by all this weird police. And I remember they surrounded us, and I put my hands up as to say that, like, don't arrest me or don't touch me. But they kind of grabbed the cameraman and they started beating him. And I started saying like, stop, he's a journalist, but I'm sure they didn't listen to me, but at some point they stopped. But he was beaten really, really badly. So I don't know what stopped them for beating me, but they definitely beat him. So it was very, it was this situation where I thought there was this moment where you're not supposed to attack the media, but this is not the case during this protest, because a lot of my colleagues have been attacked, and they have been in the hospital and with surgeries. And so I think it's a very critical situation with the media and the police.
Sophiko, having covered for so many years, like how are you seeing the security situation on the ground for your teams, and what are you doing to help
Yeah.
keep people safe?
Yeah, really, I covered like everything, like starting the war, the revolutions, terror attacks, and etc. And recently, like a few days ago, I was telling my colleagues that I have never ever felt so insecure in Tbilisi, so insecure while doing my job. And this is when you're covering, let's say, protests, we all know the basics that we have to do in order to be safe, right? You don't have to stay in front, like in the middle of the confronting sides, trying to find some high vintage point and etc. But unfortunately, this time it wasn't like that, because you think that if you are attacked, it is somehow it is by chance, and nobody will deliberately attack the journalists, especially the law enforcement. But it isn't the case this time, unfortunately. As Daro mentioned, the case of Guram Rogaba, he's the very famous TV journalist who was doing the live broadcast at the protest. He was standing there for hours. He was holding the microphone. The cameraman was next to him, and he was brutally attacked by a man in the black uniform with his the face was masked, and he survived miraculously. And then several these kind of attacks happened, and it was all on live TV, and it happened on the main avenue, Rustaveli Avenue, where the protesters and the police were clashing. And so, and then there was a public outrage, and even the ruling party representatives and the prime minister said that it is unacceptable that the journalists are attacked. And what happened now, the tactics have changed. When the riot police arrives, they let us film, so they do not touch us. Although before we had verbally and physically abused, including me and my cameraman, and lots of journalists were there. But if you go a step to the streets nearby, like few steps, then you will be attacked by a mob. They are dressed in the black, I don't know, the black clothes, the faces are covered, and even though, and they know that they are attacking journalists, the foreign journalists, local journalists, the journalists which have like visibly they are journalists, right? They are holding the cameras or the microphones. They were attacked brutally, beaten. And the worst thing is that nobody is held accountable for that. Nobody has been arrested for that. Also, these attacks in many cases happen on live TV, and it is very, very alarming. That's why I thought that it is first time in my entire life, in my entire career, that I feel that I'm not secure in my own city covering the events that are unfolding. And it is very alarming that nobody is held accountable so far.
Do any of you have any explanation for why it's different now? Like what has changed? Like why this is so much more dangerous and why the tactics are so much more insidious?
Desperation. I think the government realizes that there's something different about these protests. The way, how quickly this escalated. Thanksgiving Day in the US, all this came to a head. They nominated for the future president to be nominated, on Saturday, so tomorrow, is a, anti-American, anti-Western, just kind of mean guy who is very profane, says nasty things in parliament. that was a slap in the face, I think, for the Georgian people, and then turning away from the EU. And the way that people reacted, even after 5 months of protests that were, the violence was appalling then. The way people came out immediately on that day, because 2 days before that, there was a protest and it was kind of sad. It was raining, there weren't many people. It was when Parliament was first sworn in, the illegitimate Parliament, I would say. And people were kind of mocking the situation. And then all of a sudden, that day, everything just exploded. And, people keep making comparisons to Maidan, which the article I just wrote, I'm saying it's not a Maidan, but that is one similarity where you had just, a government turn away from the EU, and all of a sudden people are out in the cold, in the snow, getting sprayed with fire hoses, which are spiked with tear gas, by the way. It's an appalling thing they do. But I think it just shows that they are genuinely desperate. They've tried tactics over the last 15 days. They've tried, having the riot police come in. They've tried the situation Daro was talking about, where they just isolate people and beat them. They go after journalists. They keep changing it up, and none of it works. And so they only get more brutal. But that would be my explanation just right away. And Daro, the situation you just named, was that on film? Did someone film that?
No, no one filmed it because it was only me and him and no one else. So, and it was very new because it was one of the first clashes. It was the first day of the clash. So
Right.
I don't think any of us expected that kind of attack on journalists. And, in response to the protesters building like barricades and using fireworks against the riot police, the Georgian government, they implemented a ban on pyrotechnics, face coverings, and commonly used by demonstrators, to protect against tear gas and to evade the identification. So now it's all prohibited. And this is a law. I think it came when it will, Sophiko, maybe,
Yeah,
like
it
when.
was today, but I think the president has to sign it into the law. It didn't happen yet, but it's, yeah.
I'm going to take a few of these questions that are popping up in the from viewers. First, and I don't know which of you would be most, perhaps Sophiko, you could take this. How important is it that protests have been happening also outside of Tbilisi? This person says they've been seeing footage from, many other towns. Is that significant?
Yeah, of course it is significant, because when we're talking about the scope, that it is not diminishing, or but it is increasing. It doesn't include only the capital Tbilisi, but also includes the other cities and towns. And I was listening to the president's interview the other day, and she said in 41 towns and the cities the protests were held. They are big or small, but still people are protesting, which is very important. And even the towns that we have never ever heard that some protest movements existed, the towns now that the people are getting out. So it is important, because it shows that it's not only capital when the people want to be part of the EU. It is also the thing that they all it's something that the Georgians united, right? It is in the big cities or small cities, the people are protesting and they want to defend their European future, and it is very important development.
And I imagine part of that, someone asked about the information environment and the role social media is playing. Is that connecting these communities? Is there a Russian hand on social media? Like, just describe the information environment for us a little bit. Sophie, or actually, Daro, maybe you could take that.
No, I was thinking with the traditional media often under pressure, like we are now. I think citizens use social media to report the event in real time. So videos of police violence and protesters' injuries are, they're posted and they're taken by just regular citizens and protesters. So I think it gives it's raising awareness of the governmental actions. So it also has a role in this direction.
Mhm. Will, do you have anything more to add on the information environment? I don't know if you guys can see this question here on the side.
Yeah, one amazing thing that happened pretty early on is that people started going to the public broadcaster and forcing themselves inside to take because that's basically the only channel that's going to reach the regions, often where people aren't really using Facebook and stuff. And so there were efforts made very early on to do that. I don't know how directly effective they were, but for me, that was very symbolic of an
Mhm.
effort to get the entire country involved. And the fact that the entire country is involved is very, very important. It says a lot because otherwise it would be written off as just a Tbilisi elite type thing,
Mhm.
which it is very much not.
Mhm.
So
Dara, you were describing some ways in which, journalists were sort of supporting each other. Can you just go into that a little bit as you're out, on the ground? How are you having to change how you're operating?
Yes, I think there's a huge support with all of us. Even when we don't know each other, we feel protected because if we stick together, for example, with the cameraman and me that I was mentioning the story earlier, we really took care of each other as in kind of escaping this. So how we were surrounded by police, we were helping each other kind of jump over the steps and helping each other up and putting this the eye drops in the eyes. So I mean, it was like not we don't know each other, but we take care of each other because we know that we are at a danger of being attacked. So whenever we see each other with the colleagues see each other, we pretty much feel obligated and feel responsible for each other's safety. So I did feel that a lot. Like when I go out to photograph, when I see my colleagues around, I feel more safe. So I think that's quite. It's a nice feeling to have this.
Yeah. Um, Anything else that either of you want to add to that, what you've been seeing and how journalists are changing how they're having to operate?
Yeah, I can add because there's this kind of small press center organized, and will journalists sometimes get there to have a safe space. And we were all there, like local journalists, foreign journalists. We didn't know each other. Not all of us were acquainted, but we heard about the attack on one of the small streets against the local TV crew. And then when somebody wanted to get out of the press center, all of the journalists were saying, no, don't go alone. We have to organize the small groups. We have to move together. And it was kind of a really empowering because seeing such a unity, such a compassion, and really that night was really very scary night. And all of the journalists tried to be together and kind of in small groups to move, even not to leave the premises of the press center alone. That was a really good thing to see, the solidarity we had.
Yeah.
Before I move back to some bigger picture questions that are coming up in the chat, Will, you had described some of the tactics of the protesters too, which are pretty inventive, actually. Can you go into that?
Yeah. So there's one, it's an amazing app, and they've just launched a new one. So the one, it's called Overview, and it's through Telegram. And protesters are just marking the positions of the police on these maps because if you can imagine, Tbilisi, there's the main street is called Rustaveli Avenue, and that's where this all takes place, right in front of Parliament. And then the side streets are where everyone goes, usually to get away, but that's where the police and then the Titushki, which are these masked guys in black hired by the government to beat everybody up. That's where people are getting cornered and attacked. So, yeah, I'm looking at it right now. It's called Overview. And so by marking where the police positions are, it shows you where to avoid. And now they're marking where protesters are to show where you can be safe. Because Usually you get attacked if you're alone. That's one of the things is and if you see in these videos, it's just this mass of black and they just grab you and pull you out of the crowd. And then there's just one extraordinary video of a woman, I'm trying to find her name, who just got fed up. This may have been the third or fourth day. And she just started screaming at this line, like a legion of riot police, and just said, what is wrong with you? Who do you think you are? I am so tired of this. And she walked up and just walked straight into them and walked into the line. They were afraid. They didn't even grab her. She just walked straight through. She just was so fed up. And I think they fined her 720, I guess, no, yeah, 870 euros it would have been. Her name was Nana Tomaradze. And I just think that shows so much about that. Just image just said everything for me. And another thing I want to mention too that's terrifying is the police are now stopping people at metros and they're confiscating helmets, masks, and even flags. And not just European flags, they're confiscating Georgian flags. And I think that says everything. That, they're stopping people looking through their bags for essentially what they would call protest equipment. And fireworks, sure, I can understand if they're trying to ban that, but if they're taking Georgian flags, that says quite a lot.
I'm going to read a question here from Beth, another OPC governor. How can the regime side with Russia after all Russia has done, not only to attack Ukraine, but also attack and take over parts of Georgia in the post? Like, why would anyone want to cozy up to Russia right now? What's behind that impulse?
Who's that for?
Well, Sophiko, I don't know if that puts you, is there a stab you could take at that?
Yeah, it is. It is strange, and it is something that everyone in Georgia are asking themselves. So why can the government try to have close ties with the country that has occupied 20% and is still continuing? There's a creeping occupation that Daro mentioned, continuing on a daily basis when people are waking up and they cannot even reach their orchards or they go to the cemetery because the barbed wire is erected in front of their houses, and they call it de facto border with the breakaway region of Georgia, and the Russian soldiers are erecting that. So it is that's a question that because it's a natural choice. You do not want to be close to the neighbor that is stealing your land and that is killing and that has occupied your territories, and it is absolutely natural that you strive to join the alliance that will protect your territorial integrity and protect the human rights and respect the human rights and etc. So why our government decided to side with Russia? I'm a reporter, I cannot answer all those questions, but yeah, there are many indicators when it started. One of the main indicators that we are shifting our way from Europe to Russia was this adoption of the law about the foreign influence. And the second was, which absolutely mirrored the Russian law, and it was labeled as a Russian law. And the second was the law about the LGBTQ plus rights, which also mirrored the Russian legislation. And then it became evident that we are not going into the direction that we have written in the Constitution, that something is not okay here. And and then the third, like a big slap into the face of the Georgian citizens, was this announcement about the halting EU accession talks. And I don't know why, and I think the political analysts will make the better assumption than I will do about it.
I'd love to hear, Daro and Will, you stab at that as well. I mean, it's sort of unanswerable in some ways, but I think it's a big why. Like, why is the government cozying up to Russia?
It's a very cynical bid to hold on to power. I think in a very simple way, it's just that. They see that as the only way to, and this country is run by one man right now, and his name is Bidzina Ivanishvili. He is a billionaire oligarch. who made his money in Russia and still has holdings in Russia. So the easy answer is that he sees Russia as the way to hold on to power. But it's more complicated than that because he's also afraid of Russia. So if there is going to be some sort of deal to where he will leave, he will want protection from Russia. He hires South African and British former special forces as his security people. Also, early on, they started trying to repair relations with Russia. And I see it as kind of a toxic relationship where when you're trying to negotiate with someone who is, I mean, it's the largest country in the world per land-wise, at least. And Georgia has 3.75 million people, and it's the size of South Carolina. So, this is not an even negotiation. And so what happens is more and more demands are pressed on them. And essentially, Russia has, from at least what we're hearing, has issued a list of demands, and those are to legalize their military bases and to remove Article 78 from the Georgian Constitution, which says Georgia has to remain on a pro-Western EU path. EU integration is part of the Georgian Constitution. They want that removed. So this has happened. For us, it seems kind of gradual and then all of a sudden, but there have been signs of it all along. And the other problem was that the current opposition and former administration was painting it as simply that this billionaire was a Russian spy. He was just a boogeyman who was just, the same as Putin. And that simplification caused problems. It's not a simple binary like that. And that oversimplification really made it hard to get into the nuances of what was happening and how we got here. So that's been part of the problem as well.
Daro, is there anything else you'd like to?
Well, I don't know, there's economic dependency, like geopolitical realities, political dynamics, tied between the Georgian Dream and Russia with the and their distrust towards the West. I mean, and there's so many topics we can touch on this. I don't think I'm very relevant to get deep into it, but I feel like there's this geopolitical location also of Georgia. It's I think there are many aspects to kind of discuss about this, kind of to understand it more, and also because we don't really have the answers.
Someone writes in, it's my understanding there's been a governmental implementation of education reform that removes parts of Georgian historical resistance to Russia. I'm wondering, actually, Daro, I feel like some of your work actually really does relate to that. And you were saying to me on the phone how distinct Georgia really is. And I just wondered if you could address that question.
Can you repeat that again? I'm sorry.
Someone understands that there's been a program of educational reform that's removing sort of the history of Georgia's resistance to Russia. Does anyone have any information?
Yeah, I don't think I have a good information on that to speak about it. Maybe Sophiko, do you know anything about?
It became evident around 3 weeks ago that some of the topics that deals with the Georgian historical resistance to Russia were removed from the exams. So from the school exams, and those topics were removed, and it really caused a big criticism, and the teachers were saying raising this topic, and but then came this announcement on 28th of November, and unfortunately people kind of shift their attention to this, and it kind of turned blind eye on this issue. But it was something that the teachers themselves have raised the alarm, that some of the topics that dealt about the historical resistance of Georgia towards Russia were taken out of the exams, not from the education program, but from the exams that the school children have to pass through to graduate.
So tomorrow is a big day. So two questions. I think first, Sophiko, can you just again start by laying out what will happen, what might happen tomorrow?
Okay, what will happen? I think, like we all know, that the new president of Georgia will be elected tomorrow. It will be 53-year-old football player, former football player, Mikhail Pavelashvili, who was the MP since 2016 under the Georgian Dream Ticket. He is the guy who then has established the political movement, the power of people, right? I think, yeah. And this movement was one of the authors of this Russian law. And he is his rhetoric is very anti-Western. We have seen him cursing and using explicit, not the very polite language inside the parliament. This choice it came as a shock to everyone, as a surprise to everyone, and I'm sure it was a surprise to the members of the Georgian Dream Party also. We don't know why he was selected to become the president. And it is the first time that the Georgia is not electing the president by direct vote, but it will be electoral college, which consists of 300 people, including the MPs and other representatives who will elect the president. The opposition is boycotting the parliament sessions, and they said that they will not participate into this election process, but they will participate or not. The election will go ahead, and tomorrow they will elect the new president, whose inauguration is set for 29th of December. But at the same time, the current Georgian president, Salome Zurabishvili, said that she is not recognizing the power of as well as the opposition. They are not recognizing the legitimacy of the parliament, and any decision that the parliament is making is illegitimate. And Salome Zurabishvili said that she is the only legitimate power within the country. So what will happen next after 29th of December? It is very interesting.
What are your respective coverage plans for this? Like, what are you preparing for? What do you expect to see? Daro, maybe you could take this first. What do you expect tomorrow to look like for you?
I'm expecting it's going to get a bit chaotic outside during the protest. I think. I don't know yet what will happen, but I think many people will arrive early in the morning because it's at 9:00 a.m. If I'm not mistaken. Yeah, it's and I think I think they chose this person, Mikhail Pavelashvili, because maybe he will be easy to control and he'll be like a puppet. So I think it's to look at it this way, why they chose him and not like a different like a person like Salome's with that kind of a CV and education and so on and so on. So I think tomorrow will be a little bit chaotic outside, if I'm predicting it right, but I don't know exactly what will happen.
Will, how about you? What are your coverage plans for tomorrow?
Well, first, one thing is, I would say only one man selected this president. He came in, he said who it was going to be. And as I know, some people started arguing, and he said, no, this is it. So Ivanishvili made that decision. Only one person decided it, and the electoral college will vote that way. So he will be the new president, and yes, they think he'll be a puppet. They have a history of picking presidents that they back who then turn on them, and the last two have done that. I'm including Zurabishvili, who has become kind of almost a folk hero now, and no one would have expected this a year ago. It's remarkable what she's done. And it's not just her saying she's the only legitimate, sort of authority figure. It's all of the opposition, all the people in the streets, they're looking to her. So when they sort of, it's not an inauguration tomorrow. It's they're officially appointing him as a candidate. And then on the 29th, he'll be inaugurated. So that means that technically Zurabishvili has to be out of the presidential residence and be out as a president. And she has said she's not leaving. Now, whether she means that in a spatial way exactly, we aren't sure. But my prediction is that it means that, and that there is a chance that she might just stay right where she is. She has said that the parliament is illegitimate, that this president will be illegitimate, and that and she has, let's say, legal grounds to claim this based on, all of these irregularities in the election. And so I think there's a chance that all the protesters, there will be some nearly 100,000 people out there tomorrow. And I think a good amount of those people are going to line up in front of her residence and make sure that they cannot drag her out. And that could culminate in something, that would be extreme. But it also could be a moment for Georgia in which, it shows a certain amount of defiance and that the government can't remove her. Does not have the power to. It could also go the other way and violence could occur. But I fear that is the scenario that it seems like the last 15 days have been building up to that.
I have corrective information. They're cutting protection from the state for Salome for a year. And they also cut the heating in the presidential residency. So she has heating for 2 rooms with the plug-in heater or something like that, as I know correctly.
Wow.
If I have the correct information.
Yep, and that sets the stage all the more because if you turn off the heating on her, she will be more likely to stay. And that's what I love about Georgians and her especially. The first night when these protests began, there was an image of her. She came out with her security guarding her, walked up to the riot police and started tapping on their shields and says, "Who do you serve? Georgia or Russia? To whom are you sworn? You swore an oath. Who did you swear that oath to? You swore to me, the president. Who do you serve?" And just walked along, almost like a grandmother scolding these guys who were hiding behind masks and were, mortified. And also the idea that her security was potentially having to protect her from riot police. It was an absurd image, but I think it sort of set the stage for what's happening. And she knows that. And so I think, by, cutting the power or removing her security, I mean, if you have 10,000 people outside of her residence, I don't think she doesn't need security. And I laugh when I say that, but that's kind of what I fear is that the protesters who are out there will essentially become her security. And that's a situation that could go 2 different ways, but it feels like it's building up to that.
One question from an audience for you, Sophiko. How unified are the opposition parties against the Dream Party? And then also, I wanted to just throw to you, you've been covering Georgia for decades now, like how just contextualize this moment for us in the biggest terms, kind of what's at stake tomorrow.
I'm not sure about tomorrow, definitely, because it is all set and it is, we all know what will happen tomorrow. But to put into perspective the moment we are now, this protest, I think it is very important. I think it's one of the most important events that I have covered in my entire career, and I was covering from 90s. That it is very important point for Georgia. So where it will go, will this how this protest will unfold, what is the future for the people who are standing outside, and how strong this movement will be. So I think it is very important in determining the Georgia's path in many years to come, and this is the moment that will determine Georgia's path in many years to come. And concerning the opposition, we've seen that all the four opposition parties and the coalitions that have gained seats in the parliament during the elections, they refused to enter the parliament, and they are very united in their fight against the Georgian dream, I would say. And they say they will not give the legitimacy to this government, to this parliament. And so far they are fulfilling their word, and none of the opposition party members have been in the parliament building and participated in the parliamentary session, and they are not in the forefront of the protest, I would say, because this protest that we see is more organized by the civil society. We don't see the political leaders there. I mean, they are standing, but they are not leading the protest. We don't hear they are not, as usually we're used to, they have the megaphones that they called for people to do this and that. This protest doesn't have it. The people are getting out and they are standing, sometimes in a silence. And so the leaders of the opposition parties are not leading this protest. It is the civil society, young people mostly, who are in the leadership for this protest.
And that's a very good thing too, because in some ways I think people were frustrated by the opposition parties. They didn't lose the election, but still, the protests that we've seen are a bunch of, they're big stages, loud music, and opposition leaders doing brave heart imitations, and people were just getting tired of it. So I think the opposition leaders realized they needed to take a step back, because this has been a grassroots movement that just came up, and they're just staying out of the way in a very good way. And also, I've got to say, if Sophiko says this is the biggest thing she's covered since the 90s, then pay attention.
Yeah, totally. I wanted to just ask you all, we only have a few minutes left. There's a few questions I haven't gotten to on the side, but before I go through those, I'm just wondering if there's anything else you guys feel like I haven't asked that you'd like to say, or make sure that people understand.
I just feel like it's funny how the government has no proper connection with the people. Like they're not having any conversation with the people. That's how I see it. They live in this bubble, and I think people really got fed up with this, because it's I still think they can't understand how powerful people can become during this time if they're fed up. So they have to watch out for that, I think.
Anyone else have anything that you feel like it's important to understand that I haven't asked?
I think just that these young Georgians are fighting to claim their future. They feel like it's being taken away. And they're standing out in the streets, breathing in just massive amounts of tear gas, taking beatings to prove that this is not Russia. And I think they've made that point very well. Also, in terms of who the government serves one man. And that's been the problem for a while now. And I think the Georgian people realize that, and that is the fundamental problem here. And that one man now sees Russia as the only way to stay in power.
Two questions to close us out. One from an audience member again. What are your thoughts on what is needed from the international community to make a lasting change in the current situation? And then I'm just going to read this now. Well, I'll get back to that one. So let's just talk about, I mean, there was just a meeting with Trump. I don't know, that's sort of an unanswerable question, but what could the international community do that would actually make an impact here?
When we talk with the protesters, there's a big hope that the Georgia will not be abandoned, and it is very important because, as we've said, it's a very small country with 3.4, less than 4 million people living here, and it is so important that for the protesters to have this feeling that they are not alone. That it is not the struggle only for this nation, but it has the bigger picture of the nation struggling for that, like striving and fighting for their independence, and to become the part of the Europe, to become the part of this club that gives you, that protects your human rights, and etc., etc. And it is such a big hope that the United States and the Western countries will not abandon. And there's also kind of they really want more drastic measures to be taken. It's not only the concerns that sometimes we're reading in the statements and etc. They're telling us in an interview, we're tired reading about that, how West is concerned about the situation in Georgia. We want the real steps. We want the real steps to be taken. So those who are abusing the power, those who are intimidating, beating up the protesters, who are jailing protesters without trumped up like the cases and etc., to be brought to be accountable, and that they think that the West should take like more strong step in this regard.
Yeah. Will, your article in The Hill pointed out 30,000 Georgians served. You made some strong points on this in your article from today.
Yeah, 30,000 Georgians served in Iraq or Afghanistan. And in terms of Afghanistan, Georgia was the #1 contributor per capita. And again, for a country with 3.75 million people, it was the #4 contributor overall, not per capita, but overall. More Georgians died in Afghanistan than any country except for Denmark. And they, those sacrifices were for a common idea of democracy. And I think the US needs to understand that its honor is on the line in this situation. It would not take a lot for the US to help. And I don't mean, right now, this billionaire, he lives in a very strange, if we bring up the global war party, it'll take an hour to talk about, but he believes that they're in some crazy theories, like conspiracy theories. And he thinks right now that this is a Western George Soros-backed revolution, and it's not. This is a grassroots thing that's happening. So when we say we need Western support, we say we don't want to be abandoned, but also we need leaders to come here and stand on the ground. We need them to come and show up and just stand there and bear witness, and also show the government that they're watching, literally. And that would be the best thing right now that I think, all these congressmen who talk about Georgia and go on, and, Foreign Relations Committee, it's time for them to come here now. That's what I would say.
So it's approaching 1 o'clock. I have a million other questions for you, as does everyone else, but we might be cut off pretty soon. I really want everyone who's tuned in to follow these guys' work, which is exquisite and important. And also just please stay safe, all of you, over whatever's to come, I just will be thinking of you and hope that things that you can stay safe. Thank you so much. I'm going to log off and end this because we probably will be cut off soon. But thank you so much to all of you. I'm seeing messages from everyone tuning in to stay safe as well.
Thank you very much.
We'll be paying attention. Really appreciate it.
Thank you for hosting us and paying attention.
Yeah, and this is going to go live. There'll be a link people can watch for the next, it'll be public, so it'll be out there and you can share with anyone else as well. Thank you all.
Thank you so much.
Bye.